6 months after humanity's departure, the problems had grown from annoying delays to life-threatening disasters. The Corvin food distribution network, which fed billions of beings across 30 star systems, collapsed completely when the human designed preservation technology failed without the special systems that kept food fresh during long space journeys. Entire planets were facing starvation. Council leader Vexstar had aged visibly in the past months. His blue skin now showed the pale stress patterns that his species displayed during times of extreme crisis. The Great Council chamber was half empty as many species had withdrawn their representatives to deal with emergencies on their home worlds. Food riots had broken out on 7 planets. In the Outer Rim territories, where colonies depended entirely on imported supplies, the traditional preservation methods that had been used before human technology simply could not handle the massive scale of interstellar food transport. Billions of tons of food were rotting in cargo holds because the quantum stasis fields that kept them fresh had stopped working. Dr. Yilmoth floated in her water-filled environment suit as she presented her latest findings to the remaining council members. We have identified over 6,000 critical systems that were human-designed or human-maintained, she explained through her translation device. From the oxygen recyclers on Nexus Station to the quantum communicators that connect our governments, humanity's influence touches every aspect of our civilization. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear as each day brought new system failures. The great orbital cities that housed millions of beings were experiencing power shortages because their fusion reactors used human-designed control systems. The hyperspace jump gates that allowed fast travel between star systems were showing dangerous instabilities without human maintenance protocols. Commander Rakth's military forces had suffered 3 major defeats against hostile raiders who had previously been easily repelled. Without human tactical coordination, his fleets were fighting blind. Our response times have increased by 600%, he reported grimly. We are losing battles that should have been easy victories. The hegemony trade wars had erupted exactly as human diplomats had predicted would happen without their mediation. 3 species were now fighting over mining rights in the Kelvin Nebula. The carefully negotiated treaties that had kept peace for generations were falling apart without human diplomatic intervention. But the most shocking discovery came from intelligence analyst Kextal of the Shadow Dwelling. Umbraxi, his tentacles writhed with agitation as he presented evidence that terrified the remaining council members. The humans were not just contributing to our civilization, he reported. They were protecting us from threats we never knew existed. The holographic display showed data that made the chamber fall silent. 14 separate extinction-level events had been quietly prevented by human intervention over the past century. Asteroid impacts that would have destroyed entire worlds had been diverted by human space engineering teams. Plague outbreaks that could have killed billions had been contained by human medical specialists. Hostile alien probes from outside the galaxy had been destroyed before they could report back to their origins. Human deep space monitoring stations had been tracking and eliminating these threats while the Council remained completely unaware. Captain Jung-min had been operating humanity's secret defense network for decades, intercepting dangers from the dark space beyond the galactic rim. Dr. Yunji Seo had been developing countermeasures against biological weapons that could have wiped out entire species. Her research had identified 17 different types of engineered plagues that were being tested by unknown enemies. Agent Wu Jin Nam had been tracking and neutralizing assassination attempts against council leaders from extremist factions that wanted to destroy the galactic government. All of this protection had been provided without recognition, without requests for payment, without the other species even knowing they were in danger. Humans had been the galaxy's silent guardians, watching for threats and solving problems before they became catastrophes. The evidence was overwhelming and humiliating. Security footage showed human agents preventing terrorist attacks that would have killed thousands. Medical records revealed human doctors stopping disease outbreaks that could have spread across multiple worlds. Military logs documented human forces engaging hostile fleets in the deep void while council species slept safely in their beds. The reptilian SSKTH delegate slithered forward during one particularly devastating briefing. If the humans were doing so much to protect us, why did they never tell us about These threats, why did they never ask for recognition or reward for their efforts? Ambassador Kuldar of the Fentari provided the answer that silenced the chamber completely. They did tell us every annual report, every budget proposal, every diplomatic summit. The humans consistently presented evidence of their contributions and requested appropriate recognition. We ignored them because we assumed they would always be there. The archives told the story of decades of human requests for acknowledgement and support, years of detailed reports about external threats filed away as overly cautious human proposals for expanded defense spending, marked as unnecessary human warnings about potential invasion scenarios, dismissed as fearmongering recordings, were painful to watch. Human diplomats politely presenting evidence of their species contributions only to be told that their requests would be considered later. Human scientists explaining the dangers they had discovered only to have their warnings filed away unread. Human military officers requesting resources to defend against threats that the Council refused to believe existed. The galaxy had treated humanity's dedication as a given, something that would always be available, like air or gravity. They had taken 3 centuries of human service for granted, treating them as reliable servants rather than valued partners. Now they were learning the true cost of that arrogance. New threats were emerging every day without human protection. The deep space monitoring stations that had watched for danger were now silent. The early warning systems that had detected incoming threats were offline. The rapid response teams that had stopped problems before they became disasters were gone. Pirates who had been afraid to operate in Council space were now launching bold attacks on merchant vessels, knowing that the human patrol fleets were no longer watching the trade routes. Criminal organizations that had been suppressed by human intelligence operations were growing stronger and more dangerous. The Korth rebellion, which had been prevented by careful human negotiation, was now threatening to tear apart the inner worlds. The rebel leaders had been quietly monitored and their plans disrupted by human agents. Now they were free to operate without interference. Environmental disasters that would have been prevented by human engineering teams were devastating entire ecosystems. The terraforming projects that had made dozens of worlds habitable were failing without human expertise. The climate control systems that maintained perfect conditions for different species were breaking down. Disease outbreaks that would have been contained by human medical response teams were spreading unchecked. The pandemic protocols that had prevented biological disasters were no longer being enforced. The research that had identified new threats to public health was no longer being conducted. The galaxy was discovering that losing humanity was not like losing any other member species. It was like losing the immune system that had kept the galactic body healthy and protected. The humans had not just been participants in galactic civilization, they had been its caretakers and guardians. Council leader Vextar stood before the dwindling assembly of remaining delegates, his blue skin now almost white with stress patterns. "We must face the truth," he said in a voice that carried the weight of absolute defeat. "We did not lose allies, we lost the foundation upon which our entire civilization was built." 1 year after humanity's exit, the Galactic Council was in complete chaos. Half the member species were on the edge of economic collapse, and several had already left the Council entirely to focus on saving their own worlds. Council leader Vextar looked like he had aged 10 years and 12 months, his blue skin now showing permanent stress patterns that his doctors said might never fade. The Council had tried everything they could think of to bring the humans back. They sent their most skilled diplomats to the borders of human space, only to be turned away by automated defense systems that politely but firmly refused all contact. They offered massive trade deals that would have made humanity the richest species in the galaxy. The human response was always the same, a simple automated message declining all offers. They tried offering territorial rights to entire star systems. They proposed making humans permanent leaders of the Council with veto power over all decisions. They even offered to restructure the entire galactic government to give humanity whatever role they wanted. But the automated systems continued to send the same response. The Human Federation is not interested in resuming relations with former Council members. Dr. Morgath, the brilliant scientist from the crystal-like Giadari species, had been given unlimited resources to try to reverse engineer Human technology. His team had been working around the clock for months trying to understand how human systems functioned. The results of their efforts were devastating. Their systems are not just advanced, Dr. Morgath explained to the emergency assembly, his crystal body flickering with frustrated colors. They are integrated in ways we never imagined. Each component was designed to work with dozens of others. Removing the humans was not like losing a team member. It was like removing the nervous system from a living body. Every attempt to replace human technology had failed miserably. The quantum processors that controlled life support systems were too complex for other species to understand. The gravitational field generators that kept space stations stable use physics that no one else had mastered. The medical systems that had saved billions of lives required knowledge that only human doctors possessed. The military situation was even worse. Commander Rek, these fleets had now lost 8 major battles against enemies who had never dared to challenge Council forces before without human intelligence networks. The military was fighting blind. Their early warning systems were gone. Their tactical coordination was primitive. Their response times were so slow that enemies could attack and escape before help arrived. Some species were beginning to suspect that humanity's departure had not been a sudden decision. Intelligence reports suggested that humans had been preparing for complete independence for decades. Hidden mining operations had been discovered in the Outer Rim territories where humans had been secretly extracting resources for their own use. Secret research facilities had been found disguised as civilian installations, where human scientists had been developing technologies far beyond anything the Council had ever seen. Military bases that had been hidden for years were now revealed as humans abandoned them, showing that they had been building their own defense network while pretending to rely on Council protection. Captain Haewon Song had been building humanity's independent fleet for 30 years, using ships that looked like harmless merchant vessels but were actually advanced warships. Scientist Kyung-soo Park had been developing revolutionary new technologies in laboratories that the Council had never known existed. Administrator Minna Cho had been creating supply networks that could support human civilization without any outside help. The evidence showed that humans had been planning their withdrawal for at least 3 decades. They had been preparing for independence while continuing to serve the Council faithfully, never giving any hint that they were getting ready to leave. The level of planning and preparation was staggering and humiliating. The most disturbing discovery came from the Vrex intelligence network. Agent Zilkar brought information that made the remaining Council members question everything they thought they knew. The humans were not just leaving, he reported. They were preparing for something our intercepted communications suggest they know about threats coming from outside our galaxy, threats that make our current problems look small. The implications were terrifying. If humanity was preparing for some greater danger, what did that mean for the species they had left behind? Had they abandoned the Council to face unknown threats alone, or were they planning something that the other species could not understand? Deep space monitoring stations that had been thought to be abandoned were actually being upgraded with new human technology. The defense networks that humans had built were being expanded, not dismantled. Human military forces were being repositioned to face threats from outside the galaxy, not from within it. The communications that intelligence agencies had managed to intercept suggested that humans knew about hostile forces approaching from the dark space beyond the galactic rim. Enemy fleets that could destroy entire civilizations were apparently heading toward Council space, and humanity was the only species that seemed to know about them. Dr. Yomoth had been studying these intercepted messages, and her analysis was deeply troubling. The humans have been tracking multiple extinction-level threats for decades, she reported to the panicked assembly. They know exactly when these enemies will arrive, and they have been preparing to face them alone. The timeline suggested that humans had begun their secret preparations shortly after the Council had rejected their warnings about external threats. 20 years earlier, human scientists had presented evidence of hostile activities in the void beyond the galaxy. The Council had dismissed these reports as impossible because no known species could survive in the empty space between galaxies. 15 years ago, human military officers had requested resources to build deep space defense systems. The Council had refused, saying the money should be spent on more practical concerns. 10 years ago, human diplomats had tried To warn about the approaching danger, the Council had told them to focus on real problems instead of imaginary threats now. It appeared that those imaginary threats were real and were getting closer. The humans had tried to protect the entire galaxy by warning the Council and requesting support. When that failed, they had decided to protect themselves and leave everyone else to their fate. The Council faced a horrible realization. They had not just lost their most valuable members, they had potentially lost their only defense against dangers that could destroy galactic civilization. The species that had dismissed human warnings as paranoid were now facing exactly the threats that humans had tried to prepare them for. Emergency sessions were called to discuss what could be done, but the options were limited. The Council's military forces were weakened by the loss of human tactical systems. Their intelligence networks were blind without human monitoring stations. Their diplomatic efforts had failed completely to restore relations with humanity. Some delegates suggested surrender, offering to dissolve the Council entirely and beg humanity to take over galactic leadership. Others proposed military action, attempting to force humans to help defend the galaxy. Most simply sat in stunned silence, realizing that their civilization might not survive the consequences of their own arrogance. The great irony was not lost on anyone. Humanity had spent centuries trying to protect and improve galactic civilization while being treated as second-class citizens. Now that they were gone, the galaxy was discovering that they had been first-class guardians all along. Council leader Vextar stood before the nearly empty chamber, knowing that each day brought them closer to disasters they could not prevent. "We pushed away the only species that could save us," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Now we must face the consequences of our blindness alone." The great hall of the Galactic Council was buzzing with noise. Like always, Ambassador Hyun-woo Kim sat in his chair listening to the endless debates about trade routes and planet disputes. He had been coming to these meetings for 15 years now, and every time it was the same thing. The big alien species would talk and talk, while the smaller ones like humans had to wait their turn. Yun-woo looked at his two companions, Sujin Park and Bao Ram Lee, who sat beside him in the human section. Their faces showed the same tired expression that he felt inside. For 300 years, humans had been part of this council. They had helped solve problems, built new technology, and kept peace between fighting species, but did anyone notice? Not really. The Zephyrian Council leader Vextar was speaking again about some mining rights dispute. His blue skin shone under the bright lights as he waved his long arms around, making grand gestures. The other aliens nodded and agreed with everything he said, like they always did. When it came to the big powerful species, everyone listened. When humans spoke, the room often went quiet, not because they were interested, but because they were bored. Yun-woo remembered last month when Dr. So Young-han had presented her research about a new type of medicine that could help all species live longer. The council had thanked her politely, then moved on to talk about tax rates for 3 hours. When the crystalline Geodari presented their much less useful research about pretty rock formations, the council spent 2 days discussing how amazing it was. It was not fair, and everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. The humans had tried to be patient. They had tried to work within the system. They believed that if they kept helping and kept being reliable, eventually they would get the respect they deserved. Instead, they watched as newer species got better treatment while humanity's 3 centuries of hard work was taken for granted. Captain Dong Hyun-yu had sent his military reports about strange ships seen near the outer rim. The council filed them away without reading them. When the Mandarai warriors mentioned seeing a suspicious asteroid, the council immediately sent investigation teams. The double standard was clear and painful. Yun-woo had spent the last 5 years documenting every slight, every dismissal, every time human ideas were ignored. He had folders full of evidence showing how human contributions were consistently undervalued. His colleague Min-ho Choi had helped gather proof of how other species received credit for human inventions. Dr. So Young-han had records of her research being rejected, then later approved when presented by alien scientists. The breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during the vote about the new trade agreements. Humanity had proposed a fair system that would help smaller species compete with the big ones. The proposal was detailed, well-researched, and would have benefited billions of beings across the galaxy. The council voted it down without Discussion then immediately approved a similar plan presented by the Vrex Mining Consortium that only helped the already wealthy species that Knight Hyun-woo had sent a coded message to Earth. The response came back within hours: prepare for withdrawal, we are done now. Sitting in the council chamber for what would be the last time, Hyun-woo felt a strange sense of peace. The decision had been made at the highest levels of human government. After years of careful consideration, humanity had tried to make the council work. They had given their best efforts, their brightest minds, and their most precious resources. In return, they had received polite smiles and empty promises. The current debate was about food distribution to poor planets. The Corvan delegate was explaining why their species should control the new supply networks, even though everyone knew humans had designed and built most of the food preservation technology being used. The irony was not lost on anyone in the human delegation. Soo-jin Park leaned over and whispered, "Are you ready?" Hyun-woo nodded. He had been ready for this moment since the day he first realized that patience and good work were not enough to earn respect in this place. Some things had to be taken, not given. Hyun-woo stood up slowly. His movement caught the attention of a few nearby delegates, but most of the council continued their loud discussions. He walked to the center of the human section and cleared his throat. The sound echoed through the chamber thanks to the human-designed acoustic system that made sure everyone could be heard clearly. The talking gradually stopped as more beings noticed the human ambassador standing in the middle of their delegation. The chamber fell into an unusual silence. Hundreds of eyes from dozens of different species turned to look at him. Vexstar, the council leader, raised one blue eyebrow in curiosity. The human delegation withdraws from all council proceedings effective immediately, Hyun-woo announced in his clear, steady voice. Each word carried across the silent chamber with perfect clarity. Soo-jin Park and Bo Ram Lee stood up from their seats and began gathering their documents and personal items with calm efficiency. The silence stretched for several long seconds as the meaning of his words sank in. Then the chamber erupted in confused voices. Delegates turned to each other, asking what was happening. Several species began talking at once, creating a wall of noise that filled the Great Hall. Council leader Vexstar stood up from his elevated platform and called out over the noise, "Ambassador Kim, surely we can discuss whatever problems you might have. The humans have been valuable members of this council for 300 years. We can work together to solve any issue." Hyun-woo paused at the massive crystal doors that led out of the chamber. His hand rested on the smooth surface as he turned back to face the assembly. The noise died down as everyone waited for his response. His two companions stood beside him, ready to leave this place forever. "There are no problems to discuss," Hyun-woo replied in the same calm voice. "Humanity simply chooses a different path. We thank the council for the centuries of cooperation and wish you well in your future endeavors. But what about the trade agreements?" called out the SSKTH delegate, his reptilian features showing confusion. "What about the defense treaties? What about the research partnerships? Those matters will be handled by our automated systems." Hyun-woo answered, "All existing contracts will be fulfilled according to their terms. After that, humanity will pursue its own interests." The questions came faster now from all corners of the chamber. "What grievances do you have? Why are you leaving so suddenly? What can we do to make you stay?" But Hyun-woo had already turned toward the doors. His message had been delivered clearly, and there was nothing more to say. As the three humans walked toward the exit, the chamber behind them buzzed with panicked conversations. Council members were already trying to figure out what this meant for their own species and their own interests. Few of them seemed to understand that this was not a negotiating tactic or a dramatic gesture. This was a final decision made after years of careful thought. The crystal doors sealed shut behind them with a soft whisper. The sound cut off the noise from the chamber leaving. The three humans in the quiet corridor outside. Hyun-woo activated his quantum communicator with a simple touch. "It is done," he said into the device. The response came immediately from Admiral Sung-ho. "Kong back on Earth, understood. All stations are ready. Proceed with Phase 2 across the galaxy. Every human colony, research station, diplomatic outpost, and hidden facility received the same message at exactly the same moment. Pack everything, take nothing that belongs to others. Leave no trace. Come home." The great withdrawal had begun. 3 days after the humans left the council chamber, the first problems began to show. The Vrex mining consortium discovered that their asteroid mining operations had suddenly stopped working. The massive machines that pulled precious metals from space rocks were now silent, and useless mining director Zolkov stared at the error messages flashing across his control screens. The extraction algorithms that had made his operation 4 times more efficient were locked behind quantum encryption. That would take his best technicians decades to break without these human-designed programs. His miners were back to using old, slow methods that barely produced enough materials to pay for fuel. The situation was the same across dozens of star systems. Equipment that had worked perfectly for years was now failing or running at a fraction of its normal capacity. The beings operating these systems had never realized how much of their technology depended on human programming and maintenance. Council leader Vextar called an emergency meeting within a week of humanity's departure, but the problems kept getting worse. The Galactic Trade Network, which handled buying and selling between 73 different species, started experiencing massive delays. Ships that used to deliver goods in days now took weeks to reach their destination. Trade Administrator Yolmesh of the insectoid Clicktar species clicked nervously as she explained the situation to the emergency assembly. The routing systems that tell our cargo ships the fastest paths between stars are not working properly anymore, she said through her translation device. We are back to using navigation methods that are 50 years old. The sophisticated programs that humans had quietly developed and maintained were gone. The replacement systems could not handle the enormous amount of trade happening across the galaxy. Every day brought new reports of delayed shipments, lost cargo, and frustrated merchants. Commander Rakthi of the warrior Mandarai species paced back and forth in front of the council. His people were known for their fighting skills, but even they were having problems. My battle fleets are running combat simulations, and the results are terrible, he growled. Our tactical systems show that our fighting effectiveness has dropped by 60%. Yomoth, the chief scientist of the water-dwelling Thalassari, provided the answer that everyone feared but no one wanted to hear. They did not break our systems, she explained through her aquatic translator. They simply removed their contributions. It seems we had become far more dependent on human innovations than any of us realized. The truth was shocking and embarrassing. Humans had not just been members of the council sitting in chairs and voting on proposals. They had been the invisible foundation that held galactic civilization together. Their engineers had quietly improved systems on dozens of worlds. Their scientists had solved problems that other species could not even identify. Their diplomats had prevented small arguments from becoming big wars. Engineer Eugene Lee had spent 30 years perfecting the machines that kept 12 different worlds breathable for the various species living there. Now those atmospheric processors were showing warning signs, and no one knew how to fix them. Scientist Taeho Kim had created the medical scanners used in hospitals across the galaxy, but the maintenance codes were locked away in human databases. Strategist Jiwoo Park had designed the peacekeeping protocols that had prevented conflicts between species for decades. Without these systems, old grudges were starting to surface again. The hegemony trade wars that had been prevented by careful human mediation were now threatening to restart. Most disturbing discovery came from the Council's own maintenance department. Chief Engineer Peldar of the rock-like Geodari species had been trying to understand why so many systems were failing. His crystal form flickered with embarrassed colors as he made his report. We have found human-designed components in almost every major system on this station, he admitted. The life support, the gravity generators, the communication arrays, the food processors, even the lights in this chamber all contain human technology that we cannot replace. The implications were staggering. The great council station that served as the center of galactic government was itself dependent on human engineering. No one had realized this because the humans had never made a big deal about their contributions. They had simply done the work quietly and efficiently, while other species took credit for the results. Delegate Kuldar of the ghost-like Fantari species floated near the ceiling as she spoke in her whisper-soft voice. Perhaps we can contact them and negotiate their return, she suggested. We could offer them better representation in the council, improved trade agreements, territorial concessions. But When the Council sent diplomatic messages toward human space, they received only automated responses. The Human Federation is no longer accepting communications from Galactic Council members. The messages said, "Please direct all inquiries to our autonomous systems." The humans had not just left, they had closed the door behind them and were not interested in opening it again. The quantum communication channels that had connected human space to the rest of the galaxy for centuries were now blocked. Every attempt to reach human colonies' research stations or diplomatic posts met with the same polite but absolute refusal. Intelligence Agent Kextal of the shadow-dwelling Umbraxi brought even more troubling news to the emergency sessions. His species specialized in gathering information from dark places, and what he had learned was disturbing. The humans did not make this decision suddenly, he reported, his tentacles writhing with agitation. Our sources indicate they have been planning this withdrawal for at least 20 years. They have been quietly preparing their territory for complete independence. The evidence was overwhelming. Human merchant ships had been secretly transporting equipment and supplies to remote colonies. Human scientists had been developing new technologies in hidden laboratories. Human military officers had been building defense networks disguised as civilian projects. Captain Haywon Song had been constructing humanity's independent fleet for decades. Her ships looked like ordinary cargo vessels and exploration craft, but intelligence reports suggested they carried military-grade weapons and shielding. Scientist Kyung-soo Park had been working on revolutionary technologies and secret research facilities that the Council had never known existed. Administrator Min-ah Cho had been preparing human colonies for complete self-sufficiency. Her logistics networks could supply every human world without any outside help. The humans had been planning their exit strategy while continuing to serve the Council, faithfully, never giving any hint of their intentions. The SSKTH delegate slithered forward during one particularly heated emergency session, his reptilian features showing confusion. If the humans were planning to leave, why did they continue helping us? Why did they keep fixing our problems and improving our systems? The answer came from the Council's own archives, decades of human reports and proposals that had been filed away and forgotten, human warnings about system vulnerabilities that had been ignored. Human offers to train other species in maintaining critical technologies that had been declined as unnecessary. The humans had tried to prepare the galaxy for their eventual departure, but the Council had been too arrogant to listen. They had assumed that human dedication meant human dependence, that humanity would always be available to solve problems and maintain systems. Now the galaxy was learning the difference between having humans as partners and having them as servants. The partnership was over, and the servants had walked away, leaving behind only the evidence of how much work they had been doing all along. Emergency repair teams were being assembled from every member species, but the task seemed impossible. The humans had integrated their technology so deeply into galactic civilization that removing it was like trying to remove the bones from a living body. Everything was connected to everything else. The Council faced a horrible realization. They had not lost a member species, they had lost the species that made membership possible for everyone else. 2 years after humanity's departure, the external threats that humans had been secretly defending against finally revealed themselves. The first attack came without any warning. A massive fleet of unknown vessels appeared at the edge of Council space. Their ships, unlike anything in the galactic databases, they destroyed 3 mining outposts and a research station in minutes, before vanishing back into the void like Ghost. Council leader Vexstar convened an emergency war council, but the assembled military leaders had no answers. Commander Rakthi's analysis was grim and frightening. These vessels use weapons we do not understand, he reported, his warrior pride clearly shaken. Their energy beams cut through our strongest shields like they are made of paper. Their speed and maneuverability are beyond anything our best ships can match. The attacks had been surgical and precise. The enemy had targeted installations that were critical to the Council's remaining infrastructure, but had avoided areas where civilian casualties would be high. It was as if they knew exactly what to hit to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. Dr. Yomoth had been studying the wreckage left behind by the mysterious attackers. Her findings made The situation even more terrifying, the weapon signatures match theoretical designs that appeared in human research papers 20 years ago. She reported through her aquatic translator papers that we dismissed as too aggressive and unnecessarily militaristic. The horrible truth began to emerge from the Council's own neglected archives. Dr. Chung-Ho Lee had published detailed warnings about extragalactic threats 15 years earlier. His research had identified unusual energy signatures coming from the dark space beyond the galactic rim. He had proposed defensive measures and early warning systems to detect approaching dangers. The Council had rejected his proposals as wasteful spending on imaginary problems. Captain Sora Kim had requested funding for deep space reconnaissance missions to investigate the strange signals her sensors had detected. Her military assessments had warned about potential invasion scenarios and recommended immediate preparation for defense. The Council had denied her request, telling her to focus on more practical concerns. Scientist Jae Sung-yoon had developed theoretical weapon systems designed to counter the advanced technology signatures they were detecting. His proposals had been dismissed as too aggressive and contrary to the Council's peaceful values. Now, those same theoretical threats were destroying Council installations with weapons that perfectly matched human predictions. The enemy technology was exactly what human scientists had warned about, and the defensive measures that could have stopped them were the same ones the Council had refused to fund. The mysterious attackers struck again, hitting 4 different systems at the same time. Their tactics showed deep knowledge of Council military protocols and defensive weaknesses. They knew exactly where the backup power systems were located. They knew which communication arrays to destroy to prevent calls for help. They knew the patrol schedules of every defensive fleet agent. Kekstal's intelligence network had managed to intercept some of the enemy communications. The translation was partial, but what they could understand was terrifying. They are not exploring or testing our defenses, he reported with growing horror. They are studying our weaknesses. This is preparation for a full-scale invasion. The enemy forces were cataloging every aspect of Council military capability. They knew which species had the strongest fleets and which had the weakest defenses. They understood the political divisions that would prevent unified resistance. They had identified the key systems whose destruction would collapse the entire galactic economy. During the third wave of attacks, something unprecedented happened. A human vessel appeared at one of the battle sites. The ship design was unlike any human craft in the Council databases, sleek and powerful with weapon systems that seemed to bend space itself around their energy beams. The engagement lasted only 12 minutes, but in that time everything changed. The mysterious attackers who had seemed invincible were forced to retreat for the first time. Their ships took damage and several were completely destroyed. The human vessel fought with tactics and technology that were decades ahead of anything the Council possessed. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the human ship vanished, leaving behind only scanner readings that proved the encounter had actually happened. The message was crystal clear. Humanity knew how to fight these enemies. They had been preparing for this war while the Council dismissed their warnings. Now they were fighting it alone. The implications were staggering. Humans were not hiding in their territory waiting for the storm to pass. They were actively engaging the enemy forces that threatened the galaxy, but they were doing it without any help from the species that had rejected their Council. More human ships began appearing at attack sites, always arriving just in time to drive off the enemy fleets. The battles were brief but decisive. Human technology proved superior to the invaders in every engagement. Their tactics were flawless, their coordination perfect, their weapons devastatingly effective. Council intelligence analysts studied every scrap of data from these encounters. The human vessels used gravitational manipulation that could crush enemy ships like tin cans. Their energy weapons could punch through defenses that stopped everything the Council could throw at them. Their defensive systems could absorb attacks that would vaporize entire Council fleets. It became clear that humanity had not just been preparing to defend themselves. They had been developing military technology specifically designed to counter the approaching threat. Every human innovation that the Council had seen over the past decades had been part of a larger defensive strategy. The quantum processors that controlled human technology were not just advanced computers, they were tactical Systems that could coordinate fleets across impossible distances. The gravitational field generators were not just for comfort. They were weapons that could disable enemy vessels. The medical systems were not just for healing, they were designed to counter biological weapons that the invaders might use. The Council sent desperate messages toward human space, begging for help, for information, for any kind of assistance. The responses remained the same: automated systems politely declining all communications. But now there was something different in the messages, a hint that humans were fighting their own war. Intelligence reports began filtering in from the border regions. Human military activity was increasing dramatically. Massive fleets were being assembled in secret bases that had been hidden for decades. Construction projects on a scale never before seen were transforming human territory into an armed fortress. The humans were not just defending themselves against scattered raider attacks, they were preparing for total war against an enemy that threatened the existence of all galactic civilization. The species that the Council had dismissed as overly cautious were now the only thing standing between the galaxy and complete destruction. Refugee ships began arriving from the Outer Rim territories, carrying survivors of attacks that human forces had been unable to prevent. The stories they told were of worlds stripped of all life resources, stolen on a massive scale, and entire populations enslaved by the mysterious invaders. The enemy was not just conquering territory. They were harvesting it, consuming everything useful, and leaving behind dead, empty worlds. The scale of the operation suggested that this was not just one attacking fleet, but an entire civilization that had turned conquest and consumption into a way of life. Dr. Morgath analyzed the refugee reports and came to a conclusion that chilled everyone who heard it. These invaders are not from our galaxy, he announced to the emergency assembly. They are from somewhere else entirely, and they have been doing this to other galaxies for a very long time. We are not their first target, we are just their latest meal. The galaxy faced an enemy that had perfected the art of destroying civilizations, and humanity was the only species that had been smart enough to see them coming and strong enough to fight them. The Council had rejected human wisdom, and now they were paying the price in blood and suffering as more systems fell to the invaders and more refugees fled toward the galactic core. One truth became impossible to ignore. The humans had tried to save everyone, now they were saving only themselves, while the civilization that had scorned them faced extinction alone. 3 years after humanity's departure, the galactic invasion was in full swing. The enemy, now identified as the Devourers from beyond the galactic rim, had conquered 12 Council systems and were advancing toward the core worlds. Their technology remained superior, their tactics ruthless, and their numbers seemed endless, like a plague of metal locusts consuming everything in their path. Council leader Vexstar stood in what remained of the great council chamber. Half the building had been destroyed in the latest attack, and emergency repairs barely kept the atmosphere contained. The grand seats where dozens of species once debated policy were now empty monuments to a civilization that was dying. Piece by piece, most member species had fallen to the invasion, their worlds stripped of resources and their populations enslaved, or worse, the few remaining governments had retreated to heavily fortified systems where they spent more time fighting each other for resources than organizing resistance against the real enemy. The Devourers had proven to be everything the human warnings had predicted and more. They were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They were consumers who turned entire planets into raw materials for their endless fleets. Every world they captured became a factory producing more ships, more weapons, more soldiers for their unstoppable war. Dr. Morgath presented the final desperate plan to the handful of delegates who remained. We cannot break through their communication barriers, he admitted, his crystal form now dim and cracked from stress, but we can send a single ship directly to Earth itself. Perhaps if they see our desperation face to face, they will reconsider helping us. The volunteer for this suicide mission was Commander Rakthi himself. His warrior species valued honor above survival, and he understood that this journey was likely one way. His small stealth vessel was the last piece of human-designed cloaking technology that still functioned, and he used it to slip past Devourer patrols into human space. What he found at Earth changed everything he thought he knew about humanity. The human homeworld was not the peaceful garden planet he had expected, but a massive fortress that bristled with defensive systems beyond his comprehension. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like a protective shell, each one larger than the biggest. Council space stations, fleets of advanced warships, patrolled the system in perfect formation. Their sleek designs, unlike anything in the old galactic databases, the humans had not been hiding from the war. They had been building the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen, and even more shocking were the battles taking place at the system's outer edge. Human forces were engaged in constant combat with Devourer fleets, fighting on a scale that made the attacks on Council space look like minor skirmishes. The humans were not facing the enemy's advanced scouts, they were fighting the main invasion force. Commander Rakfi's ship was detected and captured, but not destroyed. He was brought before Admiral Sungho, commander of humanity's home defense fleet. The admiral was a weathered man whose eyes carried the weight of constant warfare. His office was filled with tactical displays showing battles across dozens of star systems. "You want our help," Admiral Kong said, without any greeting or politeness. "After centuries of dismissing our warnings, ignoring our contributions, and treating us like expendable servants, now you come here begging for salvation." Rakti had prepared many arguments about mutual benefit and shared destiny, but faced with the reality of humanity's situation, he could only offer the brutal truth. "We were wrong. We failed to see your value until it was too late. Our species will not survive without your help, Admiral." Kong's response was measured and devastating. The Council chose to ignore the threat when preparation was still possible. You chose to dismiss human contributions when they could have made the difference between survival and extinction. Now you must face the consequences of those choices. The Admiral activated a holographic display that showed the true scope of the war. Devourer fleets numbered in the thousands were pressing toward the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. Human forces were fighting desperate, holding actions at dozens of choke points, buying time for civilian evacuations that the Council species would never know about. But then Admiral Kong continued, and his words carried a different weight. "However, we are still human. We still remember what it means to protect those who cannot protect themselves. General Minsukan's fleet will escort you back to Council space. Not because you deserve our help, but because innocent people are dying while their leaders learn hard lessons." The return journey revealed the true scope of humanity's preparations. Hidden fleet bases emerged from concealment throughout the galaxy's rim. Advanced weapons platforms that had been disguised as civilian installations suddenly activated, revealing their true nature. Human engineering had been secretly fortifying the galaxy for decades, while the Council remained completely unaware. Captain Haijin Lim commanded a battle group of ships that seemed to bend reality around them, using gravitational weapons that could crush enemy vessels like paper. Dr. Sumin Park had developed shield systems that could absorb planet-killing energy blasts without taking damage. Engineer Tae-woo Shin had built manufacturing facilities that could produce new warships faster than the enemy could destroy them. The final battle was swift and absolutely decisive. Human forces, coordinated by quantum communication networks that operated faster than thought, struck every major Devourer fleet simultaneously. The enemy's superior numbers meant nothing against humanity's superior intelligence and tactical coordination. Gravitational bombs collapsed entire enemy formations into singularities. Energy weapons that manipulated space-time itself tore through Devourer ships like they were made of cardboard. Human boarding parties used personal shields and weapons that made them nearly invincible in close combat. The Devourers, who had consumed dozens of galaxies across millions of years, met an enemy they could not understand or defeat. Human technology was not just advanced, it was revolutionary, based on principles that made their own weapons look primitive by comparison. When the last Devourer fleet was destroyed or driven back into the void between galaxies, the surviving Council members gathered in a temporary assembly on a human space station. The meeting room was simple and functional, unlike the Grand Chamber where they had once dismissed human wisdom. Admiral Kong addressed them with words that would be remembered for as long as galactic civilization survived. "The Galactic Council is dissolved," he announced, in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Those species who wish to join the Human Federation as equal partners are welcome to apply." Those who prefer independence are free to rebuild on their own, but the old system of taking human dedication for granted while ignoring human wisdom is finished forever. He continued, any future cooperation will be based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. There will be no more silent servants working without recognition. The terms were not negotiable. Humanity had proven their worth not through desperate pleas for acknowledgement, but through their willingness to defend those who had abandoned them. They had achieved what they had always deserved, not just membership in galactic civilization, but undisputed leadership of it. The galaxy had learned its lesson, but the cost had been measured in billions of lives and the destruction of ancient civilizations. Entire species had been wiped out while their leaders slowly realized the value of the allies they had dismissed. In the end, the humans had left without a word, but returned as something greater than what they had been. They were no longer the patient servants who fixed problems in silence. They were the acknowledged guardians of galactic civilization, having earned through sacrifice what politics had never granted them. The council chamber, where humanity had once sat in the back rows listening to debates about minor trade disputes, would be rebuilt, but this time the human seats would be at the center where they belonged, and every species would remember the price of taking dedication for granted.